All right, folks, we told you it's a big week in Big Ten country with a lot of really high-profile games, and probably tied for the first one, the biggest one of the weekend, is Purdue welcoming Notre Dame to West Lafayette. And to help us break that game down, we have a really special guest. He is Shaun Davis. He co-hosts the Lucky Lefty Podcast, covers all things Fighting Irish. Shaun, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
I think the temptation is going to be to ask you right off the bat about Northern Illinois and what happened in that game. But I actually think I want to start with Riley Leonard instead. He suffered a labrum injury, non-throwing shoulder. I know there's been a lot of kind of scrutiny, questions floating around about the quarterback spot for Notre Dame. But the first question I got to have is, it doesn't seem like they're overly worried about the injury. Do you think this is something he's going to be able to deal with? Can you give us the latest kind of updates on what's going on with Riley Leonard?
Yeah, he sustained a posterior labrum injury to his non-throwing shoulder. And from what we're hearing, it's more of a bruise, not along the lines of a tear. If it was a tear, I doubt very much that he would still be listed as a starter going into this matchup with Purdue. And I think they were cautious because they want to see him practice. And the word coming from Mike Denbrock yesterday in the press conference was he looked really good in practice. They monitored him, had good movement. You could see he got injured towards the end of that first half when he got a sack. He was stretched out, landed directly on that shoulder, and then tried to tough it out in the second half. They ran him a lot in the first half, and you see that quarterback run game disappeared in the second half. So it was obvious they knew something was going on with the shoulder, and it probably led to that underthrow on that late interception with about 5 minutes left because he really couldn't use the torque because he was dealing with that left shoulder. So it ended up hurting him trying to tough it through. And, hopefully it's not as sore. I'm sure they'll continue to monitor him throughout the week. But right now, he's targeted to go ahead and start against the Boilermakers on Saturday.
Shaun, I want to stick with Riley Leonard, much sought after transfer guy coming out of Duke, who's had a lot of lower body injuries prior. Surgeries coming in, and you mentioned it. It's exactly where I wanted to go watching that game last week. Mobile, but scary as far as the type of hits that he takes. One, when it comes to the fan base, what's the feeling on the transfer so far? But also, is there a feeling for the fact that he's been hurt in the past and how reckless, and I mean that in a positive way, how reckless he is as far as the run game, that he'll get hurt again moving forward?
Well, Ken, that was the difficulty of this entire situation that I felt like was a little bit unfair when it came to Riley Leonard, right? Because he was always going to be a one-year transfer. And I think history with one-year transfers at the quarterback position in college football has shown us that it doesn't work out well. If you have a guy like they're going to be facing on Saturday as in his second year as a transfer quarterback, he's probably a little bit better than he was his previous year. So he comes over. His system at Duke, a lot of people said he didn't play with talent. Yeah, but he comes from an RPO system that highlights his ability to run. Now he comes into a system where Mike Denbrock has come from that same transfer situation with Jalen Daniels that led to a Heisman Trophy. But Jalen Daniels was a totally different quarterback in his second year than he was in his first year. Mike Denbrock isn't going to get that extra year to develop. So now you have a running quarterback that needs help ascending to be efficient in the passing game. And then you have to go through the ups and downs of that. Unfortunately, those ups and downs are happening during the third year of Marcus Freeman's regime, where you expect Notre Dame to take a step. So they don't need a guy that's being developed in the passing game. They need a guy to come in and to help that passing game that has struggled tremendously for Notre Dame, say for the last 5 to 7 years, take that next step. So it wasn't the best marriage. With Riley Leonard, there was a lot of excitement, but I felt like just because of the logistics of the situation, it was really unfair to expect anything else other than what we've seen from Riley Leonard, because, it just wasn't a smooth transition, and it was more of a square peg in a hole trying to be fit. So, and that second year of development doesn't exist, but hopefully they can tough it through the schedule, which we thought was a very light schedule, right? But they're 1-1. So now every week seems like it's going to be a fight to see if they can come away with a victory.
Ken and I have talked a couple of times on the podcast now about quarterbacks who have sat behind another guy. We've talked about players like Arch Manning, for example. We've talked about how Miller Moss sat behind Caleb Williams. We talked about how Dante Moore now at Oregon is sitting behind Dylan Gabriel. Do you think that the Irish need to kind of reevaluate the way that they're handling these one-year transfer quarterbacks? We saw Sam Hartman last season. We now see Riley Leonard. Do the Irish need to make sure that they've got more of a pipeline going rather than trying to continue this plug-and-play attitude with transfer quarterbacks?
Well, it goes beyond that. I think there is an issue systemically with Notre Dame going back to even Brian Kelly. Even though Brian Kelly had great success, he was indecisive when it came to the quarterback position. Every year, there was a quarterback competition in the spring. Marcus Freeman's regime, every year there's been a quarterback competition in the spring that extended into fall camp. You see successful programs. You pointed out Arch Manning. What did Steve Sarkisian do? When Arch came, Quinn Ewers is my guy. Sorry, Malik Murphy. Quinn Ewers is our guy. And Malik, after Quinn, Arch is going to be the guy. You might want to think about transferring. Those are the hard decisions that come with being a head coach at a big-time program. You have to get the quarterback position right. Stetson Bennett wasn't popular when the decision was made, but Kirby Smart made the decision. He also made the decision about Carson Beck. Vandegrift had to transfer. Those are the hard decisions that you have to make at quarterback. Right now, they have two very promising young quarterbacks on the roster. Riley Leonard is here now, but those promising quarterbacks are third on the depth chart, and the other one is running the scout team. Your backup is Steve Angeli. He's not the future of the program. Make a decision. Even in this moment, they have an opportunity to make a decision. This is going to be the guy moving forward, and the other young man is going to be the backup. One of them needs to be the backup right now and start getting those reps. They need to be the backup right now. Make the decision. If you're going to ride out with Riley Leonard, even with him being injured, he's already a running quarterback, and now his passing is effective. How effective can he be? But you're kind of bound to that because you made that move in the transfer portal situation. So I look at Sharon Moore. Coming off a national championship his first year, a panic move for him would have been, let me go ahead and grab a quarterback from the transfer portal because I don't want to get hit the first year and win 7 to 8 games. But he bit the bullet. I have Jaden Davis percolating. I have Brady Hart coming in. That's the future. I'm not about to waste a scholarship on a transfer quarterback. I'm going to ride with the guys I have here and then set the future and set the tone moving forward. And Marcus Freeman just hasn't seen, he just won't commit. He knows that he has to do that, but he continues to try to make this jump by going out and getting someone else's garbage. And he beat Sam Hartman and went and got him. He beat Riley Leonard and went and got him. He was like, young sir, take the guys that you have in your room, develop them, and set the tone. Stop trying to get someone else to solve your issues. Solve your issues in-house. Believe in the guys that you went and recruited. Believe in your own. Because it's hard. I've talked to several former Notre Dame players. They're upset because they feel like for 2 consecutive years, the captaincy at a place like Notre Dame, which is earned in a totally different way than other programs, in their opinion, has been discredited and disgraced because it's been given over to guys that haven't earned it at Notre Dame and haven't invested at Notre Dame. Sam Hartman walked out last at senior day at Notre Dame. They're still fuming over that. Just think about that. You had guys like Maris Leofau, J.D. Bertrand, that have given blood, sweat, and tears for this program and represented this program at the highest level on and off the field. And you allow this guy for PR purposes to be introduced last on senior day. Those are the types of things that are not sitting well, not only with the fan base, but with former players. But I think it's a reflection of the indecisiveness that exists within the program when it comes to making sound, good decisions.
What other hard decisions outside of a quarterback does Marcus Freeman need to make? But also I want you to go into further. You mentioned the captaincy is earned differently than at other schools. Can you expound on that as far as what's different at ND when it comes to getting that C on your uniform?
Well, it's a collective. I think when you see a school like Alabama, we knew who the czar was. You look at Georgia, you know who the man is. The head coach at Notre Dame is not the man. I don't care who it is. Jack Swarbrick is the man. And then Jack Swarbrick answers to the board. And there is a clear hierarchy. And that means everyone is involved in major decisions, right? There is no Marcus Freeman. This is what I want in the transfer portal. And this is what I want to give to this player. No, that you have to run that up the chain of command and wait to hear back. It's totally different. And the captaincy is the same way. Like the players vote, which is probably similar to every other program. But then there's a discussion about certain guys because there's input with what this person does in the community, what we've heard about this individual, whether or not he parties too much. But there are bigger discussions that go around that C. So when you get that C in Notre Dame, people know you've been put through the ringer. It's not just a vote, a popular vote. You've been put through the ringer to establish yourself as a captain. And there's some honor and respect that really goes with that for these ex-players and the fans. So to see it just be given away, like Riley Leonard got here in January. You mean to tell me he's earned the respect of that full locker room and that community? Sam Hartman arrived at the same time. You compare him to what Steve Angeli's done and the leader and the respect that he's garnered from the other players on that team, for you to just give it away, it has not sat well with some of the former players.
Do you think there's an issue with buy-in with the players that are here, seeing the way that the new guys kind of have gotten the C put on their jersey? Is there like an issue of buy-in? Is there kind of some uncertainty in the room about how much stock they should put in what Marcus Freeman is asking them to do? If you're talking about the way that I don't want to say he isn't empowered to make the decisions, but you've made it very clear there is that hierarchy there, that Marcus Freeman is not ultimately the Nick Saban figure atop the program, right? Like he's not calling all the shots. Is there a sense that there's an issue with the buy-in level with players with that kind of system in place?
That is a very good question. And I can speak to this. His initial year, there was pushback from guys that were left over from Brian Kelly's team. Like, this is the way we are used to doing it. And he was trying to shift things and change things in a different direction. But once again, just hearing the things coming out of that locker room in the post-game press conference after the loss against Northern Illinois, where it said, is this the leadership? Like, where's the accountability? Where's the anger? Heck, where's the shame? You're Notre Dame. What we're getting is flippant answers, dismissive answers. And so you start to question once again, where's the leadership? And that goes directly and lays directly at the feet of head coach Marcus Freeman. You have to ask that question. Why is this a reflection of the leadership of this program? Because this is not good enough in times like this. So that's a very good question. 2 out of the 3 years at least, there have been rumblings about leadership, locker room problems. Last year, the dismissal of wide receiver coach Chancey Stuckey was mired in some type of turmoil and led to multiple receivers transferring from the program. So that's something that I think is fair to ask. And even I think with Sam Hartman and Riley Leonard, and if you go back to the spring, Sam Hartman was very vocal about how Tyler Buckner, who then transferred to Alabama and is now back as a football player at Notre Dame once again, was the one that was teaching him everything. Fast forward to this spring, Riley Leonard comes in. He's acknowledging that Steve Angeli is the one coming out of winter workouts that was the true leader in winter workouts, and now it's, allowing him to learn things from him. How do those guys feel? How did that make Tyler Buckner feel? That he had put in the work, just come off winning a bowl game, and pretty much had just been pushed to the side. Steve Angeli just won a bowl game, was pretty impressive in the bowl game, is the leader, clear leader of the team based upon what other players said and went to workouts. And here comes Riley Leonard, and he's just pushed to the side immediately. It is a system that is built on competition based upon what the coaches say, but that's not what's coming out in the wash. A true competition is not what's coming out in the wash, and I think that's very disappointing for some players on the team, right? Riley Leonard admitted after the game last week that he has to be better in practice. Well, guess who's watching your practice? The other players. Like, you can't fool the players. You can fool everybody else through the press conference, but when the other players are watching practice and they're watching this guy underwhelm in practice and they're watching, they know what this guy can do. I'm pretty sure there could be some divisive things happening or some divisive conversations taking place amongst players. I can't say definitively report that that's what's happening, but I can only imagine, based upon things that I'm hearing and putting the pieces together of the puzzle, that that's a possibility.
James, this will be my last big picture question. Shaun, one, say I've been working the theory, and James, I didn't finish expounding on this point during our last show. I want to get to what you said about the transfer portal. I think what happened with what happened with NIU last week is a direct effect of the transfer portal and NIL. And I think it's one of the negative occurrences, because I'm all for players getting every single thing they can get their hands on. But I think what you're starting to see is what took place with one and dones in college basketball, to where these older teams that had been together for 4 years could sit there and take out a Kentucky or a Duke who had all just got together that year. And it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison, but it's where you bring in the transfer portal a key player like your quarterback or a receiver, like those skill positions that if you don't hit on them, it's gonna stifle your whole program for a whole season. But my last question for you would be, what's realistic expectations for ND? Like, what should they truly be like? I get the pie in the sky, and it's not. A lot of times when we say this, James and I, we talk about U of I, and we say, realistic expectations, the hope that you're doing what Minnesota's doing in a good season, basically, right? And now Notre Dame's expectations are larger than that. It should always be we're being in the top 10, so I'm not saying lower, but as far as championships and things like that, what should be the realistic expectations for Indy, in your opinion?
Well, their expectations that they constantly promote is it's been since 1988. We need to win a national championship. We can win a national championship and can be a premium top at, Ivy League type institution when it comes to education. That's what we aspire to, right? Unfortunately, this is a conversation that's ongoing amongst the fan base and people that cover the program, where you say, are they really committed to winning a national championship? Because you can give lip service to it, but your actions don't line up with your words. I give you a great example. You talked about the transfer portal. A lot of people are saying now, of course, they're saying it now. You have to let the season play out. Well, man, why didn't we go get Cam Ward instead of Riley Leonard? Cam Ward is not an academic fit at Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's very clear when it comes to transfers. Academics come first. Notre Dame if Notre Dame play big bank, take little bank in the NIL space, nobody can mess with Notre Dame. If Notre Dame wanted to bully everybody else in the NIL landscape, nobody could touch them. But they can't do it because they put academics first. If you can't get into the school via the transfer policies, academically speaking, we're not even talking to you. Now, they'll give you some leeway in recruiting on certain kids and certain prospects. But when it comes to that transfer portal, they're not doing it. And that kind of handcuffs Marcus Freeman and limits him to who he can really go after, right? Because there are certain guys that fit. 2 years ago, their first call was Keaton Slovis, man. Keaton Slovis was their first call in the transfer portal as a quarterback. Keaton Slovis wasn't elevating anything. You've seen 2 years at USC, but he fit. He fit the Notre Dame profile, right? So Hudson Card had a conversation with Notre Dame. He fit the Notre Dame profile. Was he going to elevate that quarterback situation immediately? Not really. But the good thing about Hudson Card, he would have been a 2-year prospect. So you would have had time to develop him. But eventually that fell through because they started to go after Sam Hartman when they found out that was a legitimate chance they could get him. So You talk about the transfer portal, you talk about winning a national championship. The bigger question is Notre Dame truly committed to winning a national championship in 2024, right? Because programs like Georgia and Miami and what they're doing and coming on, Miami literally from a recruiting standpoint has camped out in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
They just camped. They're trying to get they got the best 2 defensive linemen out of Chicago last year. They're coming back and they're going after 2 of the best defensive linemen this year. So when you have someone like Miami coming into your backyard from a recruiting standpoint and basically daring you to come and get the best prospects, and you have no response via NIL, and you're just sticking to your guns, it's going to be a difficult task for Marcus Freeman or any head coach in the future.
Yeah, that's probably not the program Notre Dame fans would want to hear is besting them in any sort of a recruiting sense. Just throwing that out there.
No.
You did mention Hudson Card, though, and I will take that opportunity to transition to the game this Saturday because Purdue, shockingly, has only played 1 game. I love how you have teams that have played 3 games now, and Purdue's only played 1. It's just one of those wonderful quirks of the schedule. He had a really good game against Indiana State. I know the Sycamores, it's not like, this is a world-beating team. He had 4 touchdowns. He only threw 1 incomplete pass in the game. He's not going to have that level of accuracy, of course, on Saturday, I wouldn't think. But how do you think the Notre Dame secondary is going to look to slow him down, given this is his second year in that offense, and he is seemingly growing more comfortable in that role as Purdue's starting quarterback?
Well, it's interesting you asked that because I think it might be one of the biggest mistakes that Purdue can make. Is to put this game in the hands of Hudson Card. If you watch what NIU did, they went after the young linebackers and their inability to cover right now. They got one-on-one matchups with the linebackers and got big chunk plays. 6 chunk plays over 20 yards last week for Northern Illinois. You never thought you would have heard that at the end of the game before the game started. That's absolutely crazy, right? 192 yards on the ground rushing. Northern Illinois against that top-ranked Notre Dame defense. You never thought you would hear that either. You need to attack Notre Dame with the run and the play action and use a lot of movement to confuse the eyes of the linebackers and impact them in the running game. Mockobee is the best. He is the key to this game, in my opinion. Both of the running backs. I think that backup running back is averaging something crazy like 30 yards per rush or something coming off to that matchup with the Sycamores. Yep. So that running game is the key. If they try to go out and allow their passing game with Hudson Card to go up against, Notre Dame's going to come up with at least 2 interceptions. At least. Because that secondary is real. That secondary has 4 NFL first, second round level players in it. So if you go after them and attack them straight ahead with no play action and not coming off of that run game to kind of confuse the linebackers and take advantage of them in pass situations, then you're doing your offense and your team a disservice as a coaching staff. I think on the defensive side of the ball, we'll get to that as well, but it's going to be a challenge for Purdue in this game to be disciplined and balance things out and not just do what you think you can do or you want to do on a weekly basis, right? In this game, I think Purdue might have to go a little bit away from who they are in order to go at the weakness of Notre Dame from a defensive standpoint. So if they're balanced and they're running the ball and they can run for 150 or more and then hit Notre Dame with some deep passes and some chunk plays and play action and isolate those linebackers, they can do damage against this defense because I think that wasn't an anomaly last week, right? You had a whole new crew. The linebackers that were there for the last 3 years are playing on Sundays now. Now you have a brand new crew, very inexperienced, very talented. But if you're going to get them, you have to get them early in the season as they're still learning.
We would never allow this at Alabama. I want to ask you this, Shaun. Everybody doesn't know also, like, this is like a longtime friend. So, like, these jokes between us have been going on for years. But you kind of took all the questions that I have for you because that just shows how well you do your thing. I was going to ask you, I want to focus on the run game and the keep away aspect that Northern Illinois was able to do with now the great Ontario Brown. Like, and I'm not even just saying that to poke at y'all. I don't know where. I know he's a 5th round prospect, but just the fact those little legs and what my man could do. But the real question: can Purdue? And you kind of gave us the keys on how to do it. Your prediction on can they play keep away? And of course, for anybody that doesn't know about it, I'm saying that basically keeping Indy's offense, and we know that Riley got hurt, but keeping their offense off of the field long enough and playing a possession game where you can steal a game like NIU did from Notre Dame and South Bend last week.
Well, we have to look at Graham Harrell's background, right?
Right.
His Tech, USC. It's like, all right, he loves to throw the football, right? So now he has to fight the urge to do what he wants to do and kind of curate a game plan that's fit to go against this defense and maximize and put his players in the best position, right? You talk about Ontario Brown. What did Northern Illinois do? They flexed them out. They threw swing passes. They threw wheel passes. They hit that big play, the 92-yard touchdown right after Notre Dame went up 7-0. They isolated him against the true freshman KVA, true freshman running back from Notre Dame. He wasn't able to cover him. Those are the types of things that they're going to have to do early to get Notre Dame off their square, to get them playing on their heels. And then Hudson Card and the receivers can go and attack because they have them off balance. If he just comes out trying to go at Notre Dame in that passing game, they're going to run into trouble because now Notre Dame, they have 2 really good defensive tackles, but they want to get after the quarterback. If you just line up and just play physical football, they're not big. Both of them came to Notre Dame as undersized defensive ends that bulked up to play on the interior, Riley Mills and Howard Cross, second. So now you just line up and say, we're going to be physical with you guys. We're going to force you to play left-handed. We're going to force you to play a game that you don't want to play. They want to penetrate what Northern Illinois did with their formations and running stretch plays. They played, Marcus Freeman said this. He said they forced us to play fit ball instead of football. Instead of getting up the field and playing our game, we were running side to side with them. That gave them the clear advantage. So schematically, what can Graham Harrell and this staff do to make Notre Dame play outside of their strengths and play to their weaknesses? And that's going to be something to see if he can stick to his guns and be patient in this game and not go to what he normally does on a weekly basis. It's going to be very interesting. I think Ryan Walters and his defense, the same thing, right? They love to play man-to-man. Like, we're going to play man-to-man, 9 in the box, right? But you would think Notre Dame coming off live last week would say, Northern Illinois dared us to throw it deep. So you would expect Notre Dame to say, we have athletes. Let's take those big chunks. Let's take those opportunities. Marcus Freeman talked about that in his weekly press conference. We have to take the opportunities when they're given to us because they were given to us on Saturday. And so we'll see whether or not Ryan Walters can be a little tricky, change some coverages, give Riley Leonard, who's struggling with his reads. That's one of the biggest reasons he was late on that interception in the fourth quarter. He was late on the read. If he just lets it go, Chris Mitchell is clearly running by the defensive back. He's late. He underthrows it, partially due to his injury to his left shoulder, I believe. And it ends up in, giving Northern Illinois the ball back with 5 minutes. At that point, Notre Dame's at the 50-yard line with 5 minutes. You're thinking about to seal this thing with the running game, just like they did against Texas A&M. And that's where things really turn right there with that mistake. So Ryan Walters has a challenge as well. Do I come out and just do what I do? Because now they have game film on us. I think that was the biggest difference. If I can be honest, that was the biggest difference. If you heard Mike Elko leading up to the Texas A&M matchup, he said I had to watch 7 to 8 game films from 7 to 8 different teams to prepare for Notre Dame's offense. With all of the transfers, Riley Leonard coming in, the transfers at wide receiver, Mike Denbrock, what he did at Cincinnati, what he did at LSU, what he did at Notre Dame. I had to try to compile a game plan based upon all of this. Northern Illinois actually had game film from 2024 to look at. They have game film, and they recognize offensively and defensively, this is how we go at their weaknesses. And they did a masterful job of sticking to their guns no matter what happened. No matter big time run, Notre Dame goes up 14-13, the crowd's in the game. Calm down, do what we do. Can Purdue do the same thing? You would expect Purdue to be the more talented team And, when you look comparatively to Northern Illinois, that's what you would think. But I think if Northern Illinois and Purdue play, it would be a tough game. I think Northern Illinois is going to shock a lot of people this year in the MAC. Toledo, Miami, Ohio, Bowling Green, those are teams that most people pick. I think Northern Illinois showed a lot of people, and especially hopping into that AP Top 25, that they're here to stay. So Ryan Walters, Graham Harrell, this game is on you, in my opinion. Can you stick to what needs to be done to point out the weaknesses and take advantages of the weaknesses of Notre Dame defensively and offensively? If they can do that and stay patient and make it a 4-quarter game, they have a chance to come out with a victory. I really believe that, because I just don't know what Notre Dame team is going to take the field. I have no clue. No clue.
Yep. You are talking about game film, and the fact that Purdue has only played one game is probably not exactly advantageous to Notre Dame. But I will also say that a guy like Ryan Walters, we've seen what he was able to do at Illinois in terms of doing different things with his schemes and executing things for his playmakers, guys like Devin Witherspoon and Johnny Newton. Their first game against Indiana State, and again, we know Sycamores, huge caveat always, they had 11 tackles for loss in that game. They were throwing a lot of different looks at Indiana State and really limited that offense a lot, especially with Riley's health being the question mark, and the fact that they weren't able to really get him out and running last week kind of in the back of your mind. How confident are you that this offensive line is going to be able to keep him upright enough to make those plays down the field? Or do you think that pressure from Purdue could potentially cause some problems if they want to get any of those deep passes going?
Watching the field, I like the hype kid a lot, the defensive end they had. Of course, Gordon, he transferred. He led the Big Ten in sacks last year for Purdue. He transfers to Texas A&M. He gave Anthony Knapp, that true freshman left tackle, all he can handle in that first matchup. But the young man grew up against Northern Illinois. He still has some consistency, snap to snap, that he needs to get better than, but he grew up and he got better. And Sam Pendleton, the redshirt freshman right next to him at left guard, he grew up. Collectively as a group, they gave Riley Leonard enough time and opportunity to make plays. If you watch the All-22 film, the opportunities were there. Now, will they take even another step as they face Purdue? That's something we're going to wait and see. Notre Dame has to come out and just line up 2 tight ends and say, you know what, we're running the ball. Stop us. We're running the ball, play action. We're going to move Riley Leonard. They didn't move him at all last week. They had 0 play action against Texas A&M. 1 play action pass against Northern Illinois. They have to go play. They cannot allow Riley Leonard to sit back there in a spot and just let teams tee off on him and those young tackles. They can't do that. You have to get creative. You have to move your quarterback. You have to move the pocket, and you have to do to the other teams in the rest of this schedule defensively what Northern Illinois did to you. You have to put teams on their heels. Schematically, you have to. You just can't sit. I think last week they just sat back and said, we're better. We're better at the running back position. We're better at the wide receiver position. We're just going to come out here and beat you. And they realized that too late, oh man, we're in a dogfight. They're not about to sit here and let us do what we want. Imagine that. A coaching staff saying, we're not going to allow you to do what you want to do. And I think they're going to be more prepared this week going to go. Man, I love Ryan Walters, what he did at Illinois. Very impressed with how they ended the season last year. Winning 2 of their last 3 games. They were a very dangerous team. The way they played Illinois last year, they do. This team is ascending. I thought they did very well in the transfer portal, answering certain weaknesses, especially in the secondary. Ryan Walters wants to have a good secondary. That's his thing. I want my guys to be able to go man to man so I can do different coverages, play with the eyes pre-snap. And that's something that Riley Leonard admitted after the Texas A&M game. Mike Elko got me with some pre-snap looks. He got me. And so that's something that, gives you caution going into this game with Riley Leonard. Forget the physical part, the mental part. He's struggling with his reads. It was pointed out to me like his feet are slow. His drop back is slow. That means he doesn't trust what he sees before the snap, and he's trying to figure it out after the snap. And as a quarterback, when you only have 2.5 to 3 seconds, you can't be trying to figure things out. You have to know and then go through your progression if that's not there. And he's not doing that right now. So I look forward to seeing the matchup of Mike Denbrock versus Ryan Walters in this defense and how Riley Leonard is going to respond.
Real
Ken and I are
quick.
certainly looking. Oh,
Go
go ahead,
ahead.
Ken. So,
No. Close it out. Close it out, James.
I was just going to say, we're really looking forward to the game too, especially after what happened last week. Just kind of what Notre Dame team we are going to get, whether Purdue is going to be that kind of 1 week fluke where their offense just looks so seamless. I think that there are a million storylines we could get to, but we are going to have to let you go, Shaun. We've monopolized
Thank
enough
you.
of your time. We really appreciate it, man. Shaun Davis, co-host the Lucky Lefty Podcast, covers all things Irish football. Really great stuff. Notre Dame Purdue this weekend, 2:30 p.m. kickoff on CBS of all networks. It is still really weird to say that as a Big Ten fan, but Shaun, thank you so much for joining us today, and we really appreciate your time talking about Notre Dame Purdue.
James, Ken, thank you for having me right here on Big Country, man. Appreciate you guys.
Appreciate you, man. Have a good one.
All right, folks, we keep talking about what a big week this is in Big Ten country. And yes, there is this game where the number 4 team in the country, Alabama, is heading up to Camp Randall for what I can only describe as a massive showdown with Wisconsin. And frankly, we needed a guest to live up to the hype of all of that, and we certainly have one. He is Jake Kocorowski. He covers the Badgers for Madison.com, the Wisconsin State Journal. He's been on our podcast before to tell us all about Wisconsin. He's here again to do the exact same thing. Jake, thank you so much for not only sharing your knowledge with us, but also fitting us into what I'm assuming is a very, very busy schedule with a matchup of this magnitude coming up.
Yeah, well, one, it's always great making time for you guys. I always love talking to y'all, and yeah, it's been busy already. It's been going through and, talking to Luke Fickell, Phil Longo, the offensive coordinator, talking to players yesterday, podcasting, writing up things. Right now, I've been working on a piece for Badger Extra in the State Journal talking about the recruiting gap between Wisconsin and Alabama and whatnot. So we've had tons of content coming up, and even yesterday, last week talking to a former player where, Paul Chris' first game was a loss against Alabama in 2015, but he went on to have an All-American season thereafter. It had 2 sacks again, in the first quarter. So that game in AT&T Stadium. So no, we've been trying to go into flashbacks, trying to evaluate. Colton Bartholomew, my tag team partner on the beat for the State Journal, he's been, he dove into which 5 quarterbacks, or which few quarterbacks have really shined, at Camp Randall, that have played at Camp Randall and whatnot, with Jalen Milroe coming to town and just tons of other stuff. It's been good. So, I hate to be a cheap plug, but yeah, BadgerExtra.com, Wisconsin State Journal, Madison.com is the place to go for all these breakdowns we have going on. It's going to be good. Plus we have my normal, I'll be at a high school game Friday night. So it's going to be a quick change up, going from a nighttime, getting home at midnight, coming back, 7 a.m., getting up and by 8 being downtown.
Ken and I are just going to marvel at that you're going to go literally cover a high school game on Friday night and then roll into Camp Randall at, 6 a.m. to go cover this one. There are a couple of different directions that I really want to go off the jump, but I think we might as well just ask the biggest question right off the bat. In your estimation, is this the biggest game that Wisconsin has ever played at Camp Randall, at least against a non-conference opponent?
I'm not sure about biggest. I think it's up there. Obviously, if Nick Saban was still coaching, nothing against Kalen DeBoer, right? Because obviously he did great things at Washington and taking them to the college football playoff, the national championship game last year. And then on top of that, what he's done so far at Alabama. But Saban adds that extra element and what he did, the 6 national championships since 2007 when he took over that Alabama program. I think it's up there for sure. And this is something that I looked back, they signed this home and home because Wisconsin goes to Tuscaloosa next year. This was signed back in 2019, and you don't see Alabama or a lot of teams do home and homes anymore. Usually you see the neutral site games. You see, would you understand? If they're going to make money, hey, this age of college athletics, I don't fault them. I know I'm a home and home guy. I am pro home and home. I love that type of atmosphere, but I think it's a significant matchup, and it comes at that point too. That was in the middle. You had Nick Saban obviously doing Nick Saban things in Alabama, but Paul Chris, when it was 2019, that 2019 season would go on to be his 4th of 5 10-win seasons. It would be his last 10-win season at Wisconsin, but that was a program that, two big time programs, Wisconsin was still in the, granted they didn't have a lot of expectations in 2019, but they went off to a 6-0 start and then got to the Rose Bowl. So two programs, high profile programs. I don't know if people thought that there would be two different coaches when they signed that agreement. You never know in college football, but you have Kalen DeBoer, you have Luke Fickell, and for Wisconsin, this is turning into, this is a litmus test. This could be an inflection point for the program. How are you going to stack up against one of the nation's best? Yeah, Nick Saban's not there, but Kalen DeBoer has done a pretty good job so far, and that offense is daunting. The defense still looks good. How will Wisconsin respond to this type of atmosphere? And can they pull off an upset? And if they do, that's going to mark it's a major milestone victory for Luke Fickell right there.
I do want to give Nick Saban credit. You mentioned the home and home thing. They do have Wisconsin coming into Tuscaloosa next year. They have home and homes coming up against teams like Florida State, West Virginia, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Minnesota. They signed a lot of these deals, and Wisconsin really is kind of like the first one. I guess Texas would technically have been the first one before they moved to the SEC. But I will say that I agree with you wholeheartedly that if teams want to start doing this, go ahead and follow that Alabama model, because I do absolutely love that. So I just wanted to piggyback off that point a little bit to give them a lot of credit for doing that.
Yeah, Wisconsin's got Notre Dame. Granted, that's not a home and home, but you're seeing some teams schedule these non-conference games. I'm all for it for the fans, right? I know with its 12-team playoff, maybe there's not as much incentive, right, where more teams get in. But for the good of the game and for the good of, maybe I'm sounding like a TV mark here, but hey, ratings are nice. You see games, even like Wisconsin, Pittsburgh, and I think, right, or other games that are going forward. This is a, that you need to have good non-conference setups and not, and even though in this age, we've seen college football be weird with, Wisconsin Western Michigan doing quite the job on Wisconsin that first game, South Dakota giving Wisconsin a run for the money. You've seen, group of 5 FCS teams give Power 4 teams a run for their money.
Mm-hmm.
So this is very much college football is a weird year this year, but it's always good having 2 Power 4 teams go up against each other.
Absolutely.
I love all the Nick Saban love on this Big Ten show. Thank you, both you gentlemen, for pointing out who the GOAT is. It's been 96 years on a non-neutral site that you've had Wisconsin and Alabama meet up. I got to get into Jalen Milroe. What will Wisconsin, what will Luke Fickell do, hopefully, to try to slow him down and slow down the running game of Alabama?
Right, and that's going to be a key, right? Because I think Wisconsin's rush defense last year wasn't great in the first year underneath the Mike Tressel system, where they were trying to merge. Merge the elite was, I think, a term I used on this podcast last year, and it's what Mike Tressel, how he referred to it as, trying to merge what Jim Leonard did with this defensive scheme when he was defensive coordinator up through the 2022 season, and then on top of that, what they did in pass defense and Cincinnati. And so last year was kind of, I feel, my 2 cents, it was like square peg round hole with a few players. And now this is the second year, players are getting more comfortable. They know the expectations. But Wisconsin still, South Dakota and Western Michigan have been very run heavy. You got to give those 2 programs credit where, and I don't know if Wisconsin used its complete sets of defensive alignments in those games, maybe not trying to show their hand in terms of what they could, what Alabama can prepare for, but even though they have Colin Hitchler, the former Wisconsin assistant, on staff for Alabama now under DeBoer, but for Wisconsin, talking to Hunter Bowler, the one thing about Jalen Milroe is, keeping him in the pocket, and he's going to try to extend plays, but he's going to try to throw first before he scrambles, which is a great sign for a quarterback and trying to look downfield and make big plays. And but they're going to have to watch out for Milroe with that run game and contain him and if they have opportunities, they're going to have to make them happen. They can't miss on someone like Jalen Milroe. And, how many rushing touchdowns did he have last year? Like a dozen. He had about over 500 yards rushing last year. And that was in a different offense. And you have an offensive mastermind like Kalen DeBoer. I mean, the biggest thing is going to be trying to contain him in the run game. They just have to be gap sound. They have to know their assignments. And every team is going to get thrown something different that they're not prepared for. And it's going to be, they're going to have to keep their keys. They're 111th. I know that sounds so cliche, but Wisconsin, I think, they have to shore up that rush defense too, because it's, that's one of the telltale signs that we're looking for improvement in terms of us covering the team is just, can Wisconsin, back when Jim Leonard was defensive coordinator, you saw them stymie the run and then force you to pass. And there are times Wisconsin got beat that way, but at least they wouldn't gash you through the run, that which would then could set up even further RPOs or play action. And that leads to obviously then just kind of run around the field with your head cut off, trying to figure out what to do. Now it's, I think with Wisconsin, and you see with Alabama's offensive line, I know Caden Proctor hasn't been healthy and whatnot, and it'll be interesting to see just the makeup that line heading into this week. But I mean, besides Jalen Milroe, they have Jam Miller and Justice Haynes at running back, and both are dynamic in their own rights. And so that's going to be a key for Wisconsin, is just getting off the blocks, clean up the gaps, no mistakes, no mental errors. And I mean, then you can force them into, a passing situation. But a team like Alabama, it's almost funny because you have someone like Orion Williams in the passing game.
Yep.
That, three of his 6 receptions have gone for touchdown passes over 43 yards already. And so, but I think with all things, I mean, stopping the run game first is going to be huge, and containing Milroe is keeping him in pocket as much as you can, and then try to collapse that pocket and keep your gap assignments. That's going to be key.
Depending on how they set that up to try to slow down that run game, which is so prolific, you can see scenarios maybe where they're going to have to rely on a corner to really shadow Ryan Williams, who it still just blows my mind. He's 17 years old and he's doing all of this. Like, it is so crazy to me that a kid that young, a freshman that young, is already doing what he's doing on the football field. We are in an awesome era for freshman wide receivers right now. But anyway, I'm not going to start waxing poetic too much. I do want to know, though, like, who is Wisconsin going to try to put on him in those situations where they're really gunning toward that run, and they're going to have to rely on somebody to really slow him down as much as possible? Who in that secondary is going to get tasked with that unenviable assignment?
Yeah, I think it really goes to like what Wisconsin will have to do in terms of like where Williams is lined up. If he's lined up to the field side, that's someone like a Ricardo Hallman, who, was one among the nation's leaders in interceptions last year. He almost had an interception last week against South Dakota on a very errant throwaway. But not a lot of talk from Hallman, because teams I don't feel they're going against him. Wisconsin hasn't been tested necessarily that much downfield yet. And I think it's a testament to what Western Michigan and South Dakota, their game plans were, but I also don't think they had the talent that obviously Alabama, or I would say, an Oregon, which Wisconsin's coming up later in November, possesses. So this is, I think, if he's out to the field side, Ricardo Hallman, who's, an all Big Ten performer, an all-American type, and is a ball hawk. And then on top of that, I mean, if he goes to the boundary side where it's the shorter side of the field, someone like a Nazir Forcurine, who's a, D2 transfer from last year, that's, really stepped up and had, I think, a solid start to the year. But someone like a Xavier Lucas, a true freshman who they're very high on, who's came in during the summer, and the kid has just come up and earned second team reps, and now he's playing in, meaningful game time. And well, we'll see what he can do this week as well. But yeah, it's a big task. And on top of that, I mean, you have Jeremy Bernard from the Washington transfer too, and others. I mean, this is, there will be definite, in my eyes, this is going to be a huge test to Wisconsin. It's going to be an ability to show just, okay, here's the progress you've made. How can you contain all these weapons?
James, do you have any more Badger defensive questions?
The only other question I had really about their defense was I was kind of looking for almost an X factor player, because I feel like the Tide, you had mentioned the offensive line a little bit being kind of a concern. Jalen Milroe did get hit quite a bit against USF last week. Like, I think anybody that watched that game knows that 42-16 scoreline was not indicative of how well South Florida played defensively against Alabama. Who do you think on Wisconsin's defense, kind of in that front seven? Is there any X factor player you're looking to that's really going to look to put some good hits on Jalen Milroe during this game?
In terms of hits or pass rush, it's going to have to be one of the two. I mean, it's going to be, I can't put one player. I'd have to put outside linebacker group, which has not, the only player that's registered as that was Daryl Peterson. If I'm not mistaken, last week, that was when the quarterback fell down. And so, I mean, that's been one thing where I don't think they've necessarily gotten the production that they want out of that outside linebacker group yet. Now, again, Western Michigan and South Dakota were very much run heavy. They, a lot of heavier sets compared to, 11 or 10 personnel, or maybe you get those one-on-one matchups. But I'm looking at those players, someone like John Pius, who was an FCS All-American at William & Mary, and Leon Lowry Jr., transfer from Syracuse. Both those players got a lot of pressure during preseason in spring camps. Daryl Peterson had a phenomenal spring camp back in April and May. And he, I feel like he's gotten some pressure. You look at, so those two, I mean, they need to get pressure, but also, like I said, contained. You can't if you're going to take a shot, you got to get Jalen Milroe, or else there's going to be a breakdown. And that's when you're like, if you have an emoji over your head, it's the big exclamation mark going over your head. But I also think too, an X factor. I mean, another name would be Jaheim Thomas, because the inside linebacker group, Wisconsin's been known to send inside linebacker pressure, right? Christian Allegro got a sack last week, and I would say Jaheim Thomas is the big name because he can play out inside, but like on certain packages, he goes outside, and he's got the frame at 6'4", 245 to be a player on the edge that can help with that too. And I think maybe the one other name is just not even just for pass rush, but just because Jake Chaney is serving that first half. He's not playing that first half because of that targeting call that was called in the second half against South Dakota. Tackett Curtis, the 4-star recruit for the 23 class that signed with Southern Cal with USC, but was a key Wisconsin target, but then, decides to transfer to Wisconsin in the offseason. He's starting to finally get not just dip his toes in the water, but he's one of the high, people like the PFF grades, he's one of the highest rated players last week in limited snaps after Chaney got hurt. But it's a player that Wisconsin's high on, and they're going to need to have him play at a high level in Chaney's place. And he's got the athleticism and the playmaking ability to do so, but he's still newer to the offense too, but he's starting to get more handle. So I think probably the X factor is the entire linebacker group to get pressure. And then for Tackett, replacing Jake Chaney and doing his part, not trying to be Superman, but just do his part.
Jake, I want to flip to the offensive line and maybe the physicality or lack thereof of Phil Longo's offensive line. What do they have to do to stifle Alabama's defensive line? And why hasn't this? You mentioned a second ago about in the past how Wisconsin, even if they got beat over top, they would stifle in the run defense. There's a certain, when you hear and you see the Badger, there's a certain physicality that I think it imbues to all of us Big Ten fans. And it seems like there hasn't been that over the last couple of seasons, particularly when we're talking about offensive line football when it comes to the Wisconsin Badgers.
Yeah, it's one thing where I think it was funny. I was looking over at my tag team partner at the game on Saturday, Colton, and I said to him, like, hey man, like they're getting like 4 yards a rush every rush. And it's like, he goes, yeah. I was like, oh, Chez Mellusi, 4-yard gain, 4-yard gain, 4-yard gain. And we're like, well, at least they're consistent, it's, but it's, I think, Longo talked about it Monday during his availability. And he said that he wants, with this offense, one of the goals that he has is the physicality and running the ball downhill. And he feels that Wisconsin has, he feels like they've done a better job of that. And part of that's also the blocking at the deeper levels of the defense with the receivers and tight ends too. So as a whole, like he feels better about that they're running more downhill. I think with AJ Blazik, the new offensive line coach, I think, all the players love him, that coach, on that, from what I've heard from players and whatnot, I think AJ Blazik may be a home run hire for this group, both what you're seeing on the field and recruiting, but with on the field, I think, he's teaching the finer points. I think they're getting there. It's going to be a huge step up compared to South Dakota and Western Michigan, even though no matter how many times like teams can throw different looks at you, like maybe Western Michigan did. And there was a hint of, kind of flipping things with what they were showing, and Wisconsin's offensive line having to play on the fly. But I think in South Dakota, I mean, I was kind of impressed with how they moved the ball a little bit more, and because everyone talked about how stout South Dakota was as an FCS team. It's like, look at S&P Plus for ESPN, top 10 in the FCS. They've played Power 4 programs before, most notably, like last year, Missouri, but they've played Kansas and Kansas State before, and they've had some close games too. So it's in my eyes, I think they've gotten better, but against this, I mean, they're gonna have to be sound. They're gonna have to move the guys off the ball. It's not going to be easy. I mean, I was looking at some of that talent on that Alabama line. I mean, one of the widest gaps of discrepancy in terms of the recruiting gap for Wisconsin and Alabama is I looked at their two deep of defensive line. They're all 4 or 5 star players. Wisconsin's defensive line, and nothing against those, because I mean, Wisconsin's been known to develop, right? You have the walk-on tradition, you have others, and recruiting rankings aren't the end-all be-all. But Wisconsin's defensive line had, they only list 2 spots, so 4 out of those 4 players, like they're all 3 stars, and that's nothing against those players at all. But you see, like you recruit that high school talent, like it's going to be a higher level of talent Wisconsin's going to go up against with that defensive line, so for me, it just. They have to be physical, communicate, obviously, with whatever, Womack throws at them, the defensive coordinator for Alabama. And, but I think you have seen progress, but this is going to be one of the big ones where it's like, okay, if they can run on this Alabama defense somehow, that's only going to help so much more. Otherwise, Wisconsin's going to absolutely have to air it out deeper and make the defense honest. They can't have Alabama stacking 8 or 9 in the box.
Well, I mean, Alabama did have a lot of trouble stopping the run last week against USF. You noticed it repeatedly. Byron Brown, the quarterback for South Florida, really went at Alabama hard. They rushed for over 200 yards against the Tide. They were not screwing around in that game. They really controlled the clock, were able to do a lot of great things. Once Brown had to start throwing the ball, though, he averaged like less than 3 yards per completion. He had 3 yards per attempt. He had a really rough time passing the ball. And you look at what Tyler Van Dyke's been able to do so far against Wisconsin, and I don't think he's been, asked to do anything remotely of the sort he might be asked to do against Alabama. How confident are you that he's going to be able, if they say go down 7, 10, 14 points in this game, how confident are you that Tyler Van Dyke is going to be able to sling the rock and to get Wisconsin back into the game using his arm?
I think it's tough too, because that Alabama pass defense, they have players, they have tons of talent back in that backfield. I feel with Van Dyke, with what he can do, he has that athleticism where he can keep the ball. And so he does make that +1. So I would say I'm confident there. Is he the athlete that Tanner Mordecai was? I think he's got the better arm talent than Mordecai by a bit. I think Mordecai was a better runner than Van Dyke, especially with a sub 4.5 run in pro day that Mordecai did this spring, which you're like, oh, okay. But then you also have, I think, with Wisconsin, that I think it's not just on Van Dyke. I mean, because he's had some errant throws a couple times, especially in that Western Michigan game in the red zone. That's going to be a key. And it's one thing that we, my colleague Colton Bartholomew is writing about, is talking, is for an analysis piece, is kind of looking at the red zone offense. And just, that's going to be one thing that needs to, if they're down 14 points, they get into the red zone, they need to, it's not just 3 points, they need to score. And I also think it's not just on Van Dyke, it's also on the play calling, where we'll see just what type of wrinkles Wisconsin deploys this week. Are they going to open it up more? Because again, they're going to need to drop back and air it out. I think Wisconsin, the receivers haven't been really a lot of one-on-one opportunities. And I think if they have those one-on-one opportunities against Alabama, Will Pauling's really good at the slot receiver. Trech Kekahuna is really good at getting, both those slot receivers can get separation. I wouldn't be surprised if they get a lot of targets. And for Van Dyke, it's just making the right reads and making the throws. I think he can do it. as long as he gets protection, it doesn't get happy feet. And they keep him upright. I do think the Wisconsin receivers can get some separation and one-on-one opportunities, but it's going to be after that. We saw the deep passes work, later in spring camp, and then also at times during preseason camp, later after the start of preseason camp. So that's going to be key. It's going to be on him to be accurate, to make the right reads, but it's also going to be, okay, what are they going to do? What are they going to show Alabama that wasn't on film that they can take advantage of and, have them on their heels a little bit too?
If Tyler Van Dyke does is to say he has a good game and Phil Luongo calls a good game, is there another offensive player, maybe you've mentioned them already, that you believe will have to be a key for Wisconsin to have success versus Alabama?
Yeah, I mean, it's besides the entire offensive line and keeping him upright, I would say, within Phil Longo's offense, it's always slot receivers, but I'm going to go outside receiver because I think that's going to be key for Wisconsin. We know what Will Paulin and Trech Kakahuna can do in the slot. They have combined 14 catches through 2 games. Will Paulin has 10 of them. They can get separation. They can get the separation, but really, if Wisconsin has success, it's going to be if they can stretch downfield. And if you see someone like a Bryson Green, who Oklahoma State transferred from last year, had a decent year, but not necessarily, a huge, I would say huge impact, meaning like making those contested catches until the bowl game, until the ReliaQuest Bowl against LSU. I think that's going to be key for Wisconsin is, being able to stretch that ball and win those one-on-one contests when they're provided. And Bryson Green showed during camp against good coverage that he can make those plays. And I think that he could be somebody that fans should watch for if they can push it downfield. If they can, he's probably one of the reasons why.
Ken, do you have any further questions about the game before we wrap this bad boy up?
Not at all.
All right. I got one.
Go
I was going to say, I definitely have one. Alabama, 16-point favorite against Wisconsin. That is quite a spread and quite indicative of how well Alabama has ultimately played in the 2 games, even though there have been some hiccups here and there. I want you to go to best case scenario for Wisconsin. Do you think there is a possibility that they can win this game in an upset? And if that happens, what to you is the biggest key to ensuring that it does?
Yeah, I think if there is a shot, I think it's turnovers, and you haven't really seen that much out of Alabama yet, right? This is utilize that atmosphere that Camp Randall will have. Big Noon Saturday will be here. You're going to have, it's a top 5 opponent, so there's bound to be buzz. There's going to be more energy. But there's also going to be finer details in film work and practice that they're going to be having to go through right now, right? And so, I think it's going to be turnovers. Can they create some sudden change plays in Alabama territory? That's going to be key. And I think that's the huge key. But then the second part goes back to that red zone offense. Can't settle for field goals. This is going to be, you have to convert those red zone opportunities to touchdowns if you're presented that chance. And so those would be my 2 keys. Because obviously if you're a road team and you commit I would say 2 turnovers at least for Wisconsin to have a good shot. Because then as a road team, that just makes things so much harder when you're in a dynamic environment and you're coughing up the ball.
Last questions for me, prediction, and what's the next concert you're going to?
Ooh, that's a good, prediction. Right. I'm taking Alabama. I haven't actually thought of the actual score yet. I think somehow Wisconsin covers the 16 points. Maybe it's by 14. It could be, 15 if there's field goals involved. But I think Wisconsin covers. I think my initial thoughts, I am subject to flip flop. If I hear or see anything, but other than that, I think next concert, I'm not sure. That's a great question. I'm trying to figure that out. Blink-182 was amazing in August, even with Tom DeLonge being sick. But yeah, I got to figure out that next, hopefully a Jimmy Buffett tribute band somewhere on vacation.
I heard that.
In January, February down south. We'll see. I'm not sure, though.
You want to go? I think Flogging Molly is going to be up in Madison toward the end of the month. Maybe nice. I'll give you a shout out, Jake, if you want to go to that show. They put on a good one.
Do they? Okay. No, I'll
They
keep
do
that
in-
in mind because I'm all up for it. Like my other family members of mine don't really care for loud music. I'm like, my parents used to take me to concerts all the time as a kid, and I loved it. So
I went to an inordinate number of Flogging Molly shows. Got really into Celtic punk during my days at the University of Illinois. So
nice.
that is a discussion for another day. Jake, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it, man. I got to say, we've had Wisconsin, Alabama circled on our calendar for the entire offseason, basically. Folks up in Madison, surely a lot longer than that. So just savor that atmosphere. Ken and I will live vicariously through you as you enjoy the atmosphere up there in Madison.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I'll be out there early. Wisconsin State Journal Badger Extra. We detail everything from when the team walks through the Camp Randall arches to pregame, and I'll be on the field after the game too. So we got tons of stuff coming up. It will be quite an interesting Saturday to see just how Wisconsin responds and just how they can feed off this energy.
Thank you, Jake.
Absolutely, Jake. Thank you so much. All right, Ken, we have now heard from the experts. We have figured out what we need to figure out, and now it is time to make those game predictions. We will start with Notre Dame and Purdue. Notre Dame, a 10-point favorite going into West Lafayette. Who are you taking on that betting line between the Irish and the Boilermakers?
I want to take Notre Dame to win, but I don't like the line. I'm gonna go with, I'm gonna go with Notre Dame. I'm gonna just I'll go with Notre Dame. But I do think Purdue can get that under 10. But I will go with, because I feel, to be honest with you, and of course it's not the spread, take the spread out of it. If they lose to Purdue, I don't know if Marcus Freeman is going to be on the bus heading back to South Bend.
I was literally about to say the same thing, man. If Purdue wins that game, I do not think that Marcus Freeman is going to be the head coach at Notre Dame after that. I think they will absolutely pull the trigger on a move there. I do not think you can start 1-2, especially winning a game against Texas A&M and then falling flat on your face. It's like, do you really trust him to pull you out of that tailspin? I'm not sure that you entirely do. So I am actually going to go with you. I am going to go with Purdue to cover, but I still think Notre Dame ends up winning the game by a field goal is what we'll call it. And then the other game, Alabama, a 16-point favorite over Wisconsin going into Camp Randall. Here's your opportunity, Mr. Ken Davis. Do you think that your beloved Crimson Tide have what it takes to win by 17 or more points against the Badgers?
I really want to say no, because I'm always going to have a little Badger in my heart, to be honest with you. It's near and dear to me as a kid growing up in Big Ten country. I grew up loving Barry Alvarez and what he did for that program, and even the coaches preceding, and we're fortunate enough here at Illinois to, of course, have Brett Bielema as the head coach for the Fighting Illini. I'm definitely going to go with Alabama to win. I'm kind of feeling like, I don't know if Tyler Van Dyke is going to be able to score enough to stop that 16.5, or, I think that I think Kellen DeBoer's, I'm not egotistically trying to prove something. I think he just needs to show that the status quo pretty much is still the status quo when it comes to Alabama football. So I'm going to take Bama, and I'm going to take that number, James. What about you?
I am going to actually take Wisconsin on those points. It's not that I don't think that Alabama can do it. I just don't think that the flow of the game is going to allow them to do it. I think what's going to end up happening is that this is going to be kind of one of those wars of attrition where they're both going to be trying to run the ball early in the game, kind of feel each other out. I do think that Alabama has the ability to make the explosive plays on the ground that they could potentially, cause some problems for Wisconsin and score on those big chunk plays. I just don't see them running up the score in Camp Randall. I just don't think that's going to ultimately happen. I think that Wisconsin is going to give them a really great fight for at least the first half. I think it might end up being similar to the game against USF for Alabama. But I think that ultimately they pull away toward the end. I think they win by 10 to 14 points. I think 16 is really big numbers. So I also do think Alabama is going to win, but I am not going to pick them to cover the spread in that game.
My problem would be, I think when we're thinking about UCF that we forget the type of talent that comes out of Florida and how strong they've been for at least 12 to 15 years. But I think you've hit on the keys on why I'm going with Bama getting that number. I think if those running backs gash them, that play action in Jalen Milroe's arm is going to take it off the top. I think you're right. I think initially it'll be a tighter game, but I worry, and it gets to your attrition part, that will the Badgers be able to stop the run? Because and I'm talking about deep gashes of those running backs.
Yes.
And that's really where I think is going to be a problem, because it's not just the fact that you can exploit those holes, but it's deflating as a defense when that's happening to you. So that's why I'm going with Alabama the number, James.
I can see that for sure. And I think that it is always a fool's errand to underestimate Alabama. And I know that last season
you were the person last year that you would have brought us all back. You were the only one that said
about it.
They got a chance, guys.
I will say that I have not been overly impressed with the way Alabama's offensive line has been able to operate so far this season. I also think that their defensive line got beaten up a little bit against USF, frankly. And so I'm wondering if maybe that battle in the trenches ends up being a little bit closer than we think. But I think you kind of mentioned like just the sheer depth element of things too, where Alabama just always comes in waves and they're always able to kind of basically out depth a lot of teams, with exceptions of like Georgia, for example, or Michigan, who were really deep when they played them. Right. It's always a really tough battle. And by the way, a kind of a fun thing that I like about this game is that the next game after this, Wisconsin has to go to USC. That is going to be a really tough game. And then all Alabama has to do is go home and host Georgia. No big deal. So, what a stretch for both of those teams they've got coming up.
Yeah, that's so football. Like that's good football right there. You got me pumped even for next week's. But yeah, that's what you want to say. Even with the conversation that we sat there and we had with Jake about the home and the ways, and just how you guys just feasted on that and enjoyed it. But that's what you want to see. You want to see these teams play each other, and particularly, I think it's the flip of it. That it should be, because now that there's a 12-team playoff, losing to a team early has even less of an impact, that it can be used more as a team building asset than perhaps it would be in the past, as something that can unnecessarily hold you back from getting to where you want to get.
I don't think it means as much for a top, 5 team to win a game like this, but imagine if Wisconsin somehow pulls off the upset, how much it would mean to a team like that, who may end up at like 10-2 at the end of the season. But one of those wins being over Alabama would be hugely beneficial. All right, we do have a few other games here in Big Ten country this week that we've alluded to. One of the biggest ones. We love rivalry games. Ken and I there's nothing we love more than a good old-fashioned slobber knocker. You heard about it last week when we talked about Iowa and Iowa State, how excited we were for that game. We've got 2 in-state rivalry games this week in the Big Ten. The Civil War, Oregon and Oregon State. It feels so weird that game is not going to be at the end of the season. Instead, it will come on our televisions this weekend, 2:30 on Saturday. Oregon, a 16-point favorite over Oregon State. Got to be honest with you, Ken, the shaky way that the Ducks have played the first 2 games of the season, the fact they're going into Oregon State, they're going into Corvallis for this game. I mean, I love what Dylan Gabriel has done so far. He's been very efficient, has 4 touchdowns. The fact he's been sacked 7 times already this season gives me a lot of pause. And I just want to know, does Oregon have the defense to get the ball back quickly into the hands of their offense? I think that we saw them struggle with that against Boise State to a great degree. And frankly, Oregon State, to me, they're going to play almost the exact same playbook, right? They've carried the ball 109 times in 2 games. They have 599 yards on the ground. This is not a team that is going to try to air it out against you. They are going to grind it out, and they are going to run the football. And the fact that they're going to perform kind of in a similar fashion to what Boise State did, it gives me some pause. And so I'm wondering if maybe 16 is a little too, overeager, for Oregon in terms of that line. What are your thoughts heading into this game?
I'll go with the line first. I think if this was the get right game, 16 points wouldn't be that much when you're talking about the talent that Oregon has. But being that this is a civil war within the state, like these two teams know each other. And you just mentioned the fact that Oregon State can run the football, and we've seen the keep away aspect and how that's been used against Oregon at the beginning of the year. I definitely think Dylan Gabriel is going to be able to do whatever he wants, to be honest with you. I don't know if that defense is going to be able to your point, get the ball back. This seems like a game of possession, which would lend me to not going with the spread as far as for Oregon. I'm definitely taking Oregon to win the game. My hopes, James, would be that this would be the rightening of the ship, because I think if we get into like 4 games in and we're getting the same thing out of Oregon on the offense and defensive side of the ball, there has to be some concern to national title aspirations. And I'm not saying that it's over. They have the talent to where they could be 6 games in and they may figure it out. But at some point, they are who they are. And that would be that they're not close enough to Ohio State like we thought as far within the Big Ten that they were prior to the season commencing. So I'm definitely taking Oregon. I'm not going with them on the spread. I'm going to go with Oregon State on the spread. And James, to be honest, depending on the opponents with Oregon moving forward, I may have to lean towards that way until they can show us that the talent is kind of adding up to the names on the back of the jerseys, to the play that they commit on the field.
I am going to agree with you on both of those counts. I do think that Oregon ends up winning this football game, and I do find it kind of funny that you said 6 games in specifically for Oregon, because that 6th game is against Ohio State. So hopefully they figure it out by then, because that's, of course, going to be a massive challenge for the Ducks. I think the biggest key for me for Oregon is going to be to get pressure on the quarterback. I think that is going to be ultimately really important for them. I think that, this is a team that they just need to get home, because Oregon State, contrary to what you would think with guys like Jam Griffin running the ball out of the backfield for the Beavers, they do have a couple of interesting wide receivers too. And I think that being able to put pressure on the quarterback and prevent him for getting the ball out to guys like Trent Walker is going to be really important. And so that to me is going to be the biggest key. Can this defensive line get penetration into the backfield and really disrupt what Oregon State is trying to do? If they can do that and get the ball back in Dylan Gabriel's hands, I feel like he's been efficient enough with the ball and has those deep threats like the Tez Johnsons of the world that he can potentially put points on the board in a hurry. I just don't think they cover 16 points. That seems like such a big gap for them in this game. I do think they're going to look better. I think this is when we finally start to see the tide turn a little bit for Oregon, but I just don't think that they're going to be able to do enough to cover that significant of a spread.
I agree.
Speaking of rivalry games, we also have the Apple Cup that will be contested this weekend at a neutral site, which I'm not 100% sold on. I always hate when, like, outside of Oklahoma, Texas, which I love that it's at the Texas State Fairgrounds. Love that. Georgia, Florida is always contested at a neutral site. Those are kind of my exceptions, but I always prefer these games to be played at the home stadium of one of the teams. But I don't make the rules. I just, go on podcasts and say stupid crap about them. So we have another mid-afternoon kickoff between Washington State and Washington. The Huskies, a 4.5-point favorites over the Cougars. Will Rogers, honestly, we were talking about Dylan Gabriel being efficient with the ball. He's completed almost 80% of his passes too. I think that Washington has really interesting offensive weapons this season. You look at Denzel Boston, who already has 3 touchdowns, for example, 16 catches for Giles Jackson, very clearly has established a rapport with Will Rogers. And then, you have a guy in Jonah Coleman who's already rushed for 231 yards. So there is a lot of really good things to like about the Huskies offense. The question I'm ultimately going to have is, are we going to see that same defense that has been in place the first 2 games of the season? They've been getting to quarterbacks a lot. They've been defending a lot of passes. I'm not going to say Weber State or Eastern Michigan is going to light the world on fire, but that defense has been pretty solid too. And I think this is going to be kind of an interesting game to really see where they're at in terms of everything coming together in a post-Kalen DeBoer era.
Listen, I'm all in right now with this Huskies team, James. I'm taking the Huskies and I'm taking the points because look, it's too easy for me. These double-digit ones, they scare me, particularly when they're leaning towards if we're rounding up the 20 side compared to the 10 side. They put a tad bit more fear, but also when you're talking about how proficient this offense and how good Will Rogers has been comparably to what we've seen Dylan Gabriel do. But the flip side is that you're getting better defense with the Huskies. Again, because it's a state rivalry, you always are careful because it can be an upset. Forget the spread. It could just be an upset. And even if you just look at it being under 5, clearly they're saying that this could definitely be an upset. But yeah, I'm going to go with the good feels and go with the Huskies and also take the points. James, what about you?
I am actually going to go with the Cougars to not only erase that 4.5 point spread, I think they're going to win the game. And the reason is I really think that their offense is going to give Washington something to think about. Like, again, Weber State, not really going to put up much opposition. Eastern Michigan, kind of the same thing. All Washington State has done so far this season is score 107 points. Their quarterback, John Mateer, has put up over 700 yards of offense on his own. 252 yards on the ground, 467 yards through the air, 8 touchdowns in all for him. And then you also have a really great running back combination with the Cougars with Wayshawn Parker and Juvensky Schlenbaker. That's a fun name to say. They also have combined for 5 touchdowns on their own too. I think that Washington State is a team that they're going to really, 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 really want this game to turn into a shootout. And not to say Oregon cannot win in a shootout environment. We've obviously seen them do that in the past. This is not going to be, something completely outlandish for them. I look at this game and I look at the over under, which is 55.5. And I really would be tempted to bet the over in that game too. And so I am actually going to go with Washington State pulling off the upset, the Pac-2 power for the Cougars. And I also am going to say that they go the over in that game. I think this is going to be, as opposed to other games this weekend that I think could end up being, kind of the defensive nature and kind of feeling each other out. These two teams are going to butt heads immediately, and it is going to be a fireworks display, I think. So I am going to go with Washington State in a shootout up there in Seattle.
All right. I guess, beating Portland State and Texas Tech was enough to get you to come over to the other side, but I'm going with the Huskies. I love it though, because this is a clear departure for both of us. So this could be the game where we can find out who's right this week. So let's go. Let's get it. Let's get this weekend going.
I think Washington is probably going to try to slow things down a little bit. I think that's ultimately going to be their game plan. They're going to want to try to keep the ball out of the hands of Washington State just because that offense can move so quickly. I just don't know if they'll be able to do it. I think that they're going to have to be really careful with the football, and that always can lead to mistakes if you're trying to be too careful.
Trying to do something you're not used to doing. You're not being
that is exactly it. Absolutely. All right, Ken, we got one more game to break down. It is between a team that has played it's really hard to even call them opponents. Indiana has absolutely run roughshod in their first 2 games this season. They will be playing a well-rested UCLA squad fresh off a wonderful trip to Hawaii where they beat the Rainbow Warriors. Indiana favored by 3 points at the Rose Bowl this weekend. Mr. Ken Davis, that game will air on NBC on Saturday night. Who are you taking between the Hoosiers and the Bruins?
I'm going with the Hoosiers, baby. I'm going State over. I'm going with the Hoosiers to go into the Rose Bowl and take it over. And I won't say dominate, of course, but I'm going to ride with the hot hand for right now because usually we're not talking a lot of Hoosiers football on this show. So definitely. And we talked a lot about the fact that, UCLA is really down and has a lot to prove. You're losing your head coach, losing your young and up-and-coming and talented quarterback to become a backup at Oregon. There's a lot of questions for me when it comes to UCLA. So I'm definitely going to ride with Indiana on this one, James. And I'll take the spread too. What about you?
It's going to be tough because I think that UCLA having the week off is always weird when you're trying to incorporate kind of some new guys into the system and to kind of get things moving in a particular direction. I love the fact that Ethan Garber's able to kind of do both pass and run the football. I think it's going to definitely give Indiana something to think about. I know that they've got some really talented wide receivers out there. Rico Flores, I thought, looked really good against Hawaii. UCLA mixed up their fronts a lot against Hawaii's offense. You had a couple of sacks from defensive backs in that game. He had 5 in total. I think Indiana has not seen a defense like this so far this season. They have put up 108 points this season. The Hoosiers have not screwed around whatsoever. Curtis Rourke has been phenomenal. Really have liked Justice Ellison too. I made a joke on Twitter the other day that I thought that Indiana deserved at least a pity vote in the AP ranking because they had put up 108 points in 2 weeks. If they beat UCLA at UCLA under the primetime lights, I do think you might start to see them get a little bit of love nationally. But I think UCLA is going to win this game. I do think that they are going to be able to run the ball effectively enough with their quarterback, with their run game. And I think they're going to give Indiana some looks on that defensive side that they have not seen yet this season. And I think it's really going to, I don't want to say it's going to completely perplex Curtis Rourke. I would be, remiss if I were to say that. I thought he's looked really excellent in the 2 games they've played, but I am going to go with UCLA as the home underdog in this one. I think this one might end up being the most exciting game of the weekend, just from a really tightly fought game. I looked at this on the schedule and was like, you know what? I think this has the potential to be a really entertaining primetime game in the Big Ten. And I'm going to stick with that. And I'm going to end up sticking with UCLA to get the W.
All right. So we definitely shouldn't be close this week when we come and tally these wins and these spreads. So hopefully I win again. And that's the way that I'm going to rock with it, James. Hopefully also that we're going to see when it comes to the Hoosiers playing some Big Ten football and just beating up on that little Pac-12. I won't say little school because it's UCLA, but I'm talking about size of the players when I'm talking about.
Yeah, we will see what UCLA is made of as they come into the Big Ten and try to do some things against these corn-fed Midwest boys.
I'm just saying the Rainbow Warriors aren't the Rainbow Warriors from 15 years ago, where for a minute, Hawaii was giving people the flux.
Yes.
And so that's where, to me, I'm interested in seeing. And I'll say this: if UCLA does win, and again, Indiana's not world beaters historically on the football side, but it will be interesting to look at perhaps that program in UCLA not being as down as perhaps we thought they were with all of the people, the transfers from the coaches and the players leaving this past offseason.
I absolutely love that mentality about it. And it's always weird to pick games involving teams that have only played once when the other team has played twice. Right. I think we've run into that a few different times, including with Purdue going up against Notre Dame. It's going to be a really exciting weekend, to say the least. I think that there are a few other games that could end up being good. Minnesota playing Nevada this weekend. You've also got Maryland heading into Virginia for a game on Saturday night. I think that one could be interesting for those of us who have ACC Network. I personally do not. So if I really want to watch that one, I guess YouTube highlights are going to be my friend. But anyway, not to complain too much about our lives here, but lots of good football coming up this weekend. Cannot wait for it. Ken, thank you as always, my friend. We will check back in on Sunday, determine who ended up winning in our silly little pick'em game we've got going here, and we will talk to you guys next time on the Big Ten Country Podcast.
Congrats, you finished the video. If you want to build on that success, download the NBC Sports Chicago app. It's got highlights, exclusive insights, and push alerts tailored to you. Everything you need to be a real Chicago sports fan. Download it now.